When the she-wolf collapsed on my doorstep, my heart stopped because I understood. She had not come by accident. I was trudging home from the forest, boots heavy with packed snow and the smell of pine clinging to my coat. I am a man in my 60s, a widower, and I live alone at the edge of a village that is more silence than houses, the kind of place where the wind knows your name and the road forgets to come this far. I had spent the day splitting wood and checking old traps I no longer set, a habit more than a purpose, and I was thinking of my small stove and a pan of potatoes when I saw the dark shape on the porch. At first I thought the shadow had slipped off the roof, then the shadow breathed. The breath was ragged and wet. The snow around it was stamped with red and smeared with the marks of a struggle. I froze where the yard meets the steps. I knew that shape. I knew the width of those shoulders and the long ribs and the way the spine rose and fell as if the earth itself were trying to take one more breath for her. A wolf, a gray wolf, heavy as a winter log, a she-wolf, lying across my boards like a small boat run aground. Fear rose through me before my thinking could catch it. My hand went to the nail beside the door where the rifle hangs. Old habits do not ask permission. I felt the wood of the stock. I felt the cold iron of the barrel. The old part of my mind started counting distances and angles, the way it did when I was young and stupid and thought that being the one with a gun meant I was the one in charge. But there was a new part of me, the part that knows the empty chair across from mine at the table, the part that learned to talk to quiet, and that part said, "Wait." She moved. Not much, just her eyes. They opened. Not all the way, not that hard yellow glare I knew from winters with too many stories. They opened like a door that had never been meant to close. Brown, darker than the sky, edged with ice crystals. And I swear to you, there was no anger in them, no challenge, no wild rage, nothing that asked me to prove I was braver than I am. Her eyes held me the way a cliff holds the river below, without effort, without need. She looked at me not like I was an enemy, but like I was her last hope. That simple look did what the cold could not. It emptied the blood from my head. I put the rifle back on the nail without taking my eyes off her. My breath came in short bursts, fogging the air between us. I told myself, "Quiet, quiet now. She is hurt. She is tired. She will die if you make one wrong move." Then a smaller voice added, "She will kill you if you make one wrong move." Both felt true at the same time, and they wrestled inside my chest until I could barely stand. I spoke aloud, because silence had become too heavy. "Easy," I said, as if I were talking to my late wife in the days when her breathing was the whole world. "I see you." My voice sounded thin, a twig snapping under snow. The she-wolf blinked, and her tail made the smallest scrape against the board. Not a wag, not anything so tame, just the body's way of saying the soul is still inside. I took one step up the stairs, then another. The boards complained under my boots. Her ears twitched, but she did not raise her head. A gash ran along her flank, dark and clotted at the edges, bright and slick at the center where the fur had torn away. There were punctures lower near the belly, and a line of frost had settled along the matted hair where the blood had frozen. The smell was sharp and coppery, and it cut through the pine and the smoke and the old wool of my coat. My fingers shook while I unlatched the door. I left it open because closing it felt like telling the night I did not trust it. The stove inside still held coals from morning. I brought out an old blanket, the one we used to throw over the bed when the wind found the cracks we had forgotten to fill. I did not throw it. I crouched, and the boards pressed cold into my knees, and I lowered the blanket one slow inch at a time, the way you lower a flag when someone you love has left the world. She watched me. Her breath hitched. I could see the effort it cost her to stay with me, to not sink into the black river that was tugging at her feet. When the wool touched her shoulder, she flinched once, a tremor that traveled the length of her body and ended in her pause. Then she let it be. I cannot explain what that did to me. Something in my chest gave way like a dam after a long winter. The fear did not leave, but it bent its head. In its place came a kind of awe I have only felt twice. The day I said I do, and the day I sat alone at a table and realized I still did. I went back inside and brought a basin and water that was only a little warm. I fetched a rag, clean as I could find. My hands learned the slowness you use with a sleeping child. I spoke without thinking, small things, the words a person uses to keep their own courage from shattering. "All right," I said. "All right. Just a moment. Stay with me." The she-wolf's tongue flicked once across her nose. Her eyes stayed on mine. A tremor passed her belly. I dabbed at the edge of the wound, not to clean it, not yet, just to tell it that someone saw it and did not turn away. The yard had fallen quiet. No birds, no fox shadow at the fence. The sky was the color of a worn-out bruise, and the first stars were trying to remember where they belonged. I heard my own heart louder than the wind. I felt the house at my back like a second spine. I have seen many winters and too many endings, but I had never seen this. The wild had knocked on my door and lain down at my feet, and it was not a test, and it was not a trap. It was a plea. I caught myself thinking like a fool, trying to stitch reasons to what was happening. Maybe she had been chased by dogs. Maybe she had been clipped by a truck on the road that never comes this far. Maybe she had been thrown from a fight with her own. The mind grabs any rope when the ground lets go, but under all those guesses was a quiet certainty that did not ask for proof. She had chosen my door. I leaned closer. The warmth from her body rose through the blanket like a faint fire. Her breath fogged my sleeve. I could see the tiny flecks of ice on her whiskers, the way one ear had a notch near the tip, the way her paws, massive and scarred, were tucked close as if she were trying to hold herself together. She did not bare her teeth. She did not growl. She did not look past me to the woods. She looked into me, the way the old ones used to look into a lake to see if the winter would be kind. She looked at me not like at an enemy, but like at her last hope, I thought, and the thought frightened me more than the sight of the blood. Hope is heavier than fear when you have to carry it for someone else. I told myself I would sit with her a while, just until her breathing smoothed, just until the shaking stopped. I told myself I would keep my hand near the rifle in case the night remembered what it is. I told myself I would do the small things and then let the big things return to the forest. I believed it. I truly did. I thought she would die now, and that would be the end of it. I slid the rifle farther from the door, the way you slide a bad thought out of your mind and try not to look where it went. The barrel made a small, guilty scrape against the wall. I could feel the old reflexes pacing inside me, counting dangers, remembering how my father taught me to fear what moves without permission. I told those reflexes to sit. I told them, not tonight. I took the blanket back up, the heavy wool one that still held the faint scent of smoke and a memory I refused to wash out. I gathered it by the corners so it would fall soft, not slap her with weight. When I stepped onto the porch again, the cold had crept deeper into the boards. The she-wolf's chest rose and fell like a bellows with a hole in it, dragged in, forced out, dragged in again. No growl reached me, no show of teeth, only that laboring breath, the rough whisper of a creature refusing to leave her body. I knelt, and the cold bit my kneecaps and told me to hurry. The blanket hovered over her shoulders. Her eyes found mine the way a traveler finds the single lit window on a night road. A shiver traveled her spine, and I felt it in my own bones as if our frames had been wired together in secret. "All right," I said, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Just this. Just warmth." The wool settled, a slow, careful snowfall, onto her ribs. She flinched once, a tremor you might mistake for anger if you did not know fear wears many faces. Then she stilled, and the breath between us eased by one quiet notch. Only then did I see the color of the snow properly. It was not snow anymore. It was a record. Rusted streaks where she had dragged herself the last few feet. A dark bloom where her side lay. The wound on her flank was a torn mouth, its lips of fur parted to show the raw red inside. Lower, near the belly, smaller punctures glistened where ice had climbed their edges. I have dressed more wounds than I care to count, on dogs, on my own hands, once on a neighbor foolish with his axe. But this was different. This was the country of pain, and she had traveled far across it to lie at my door. I have hunted wolves my whole life, and now one of them lay on my doorstep. The sentence rose in me like a verdict. I could hear the young man I used to be laughing at the old one I am now. I could hear the old one asking the young, "What did all that killing teach you, except how little you knew?" I stood up slow, bones complaining, and went inside for a pail. The room felt suddenly too warm, too bright, too human. I drew water and warmed it only a little on the stove, enough to take the bite out. I found a clean cup, the chipped enamel one that has outlived better men, and carried both back out. The air pinched my lungs as if to say, "Do you truly mean to do this?" I set the pail near her paws. Steam laced up and vanished in the winter light. I dipped the cup and held it under her jaw, keeping my fingers below her teeth, not from mistrust, but from respect. "Here," I said, "just a sip. No more than you want." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then her tongue appeared, shy as a secret, and touched the rim. A tiny sound left her throat, not a growl, not a whine, more like the sound a door makes when it remembers it can open. She drew one careful mouthful, swallowed, paused, and drew another. The water trembled with her effort. I thought of every simple thing I had ever taken for granted and felt ashamed. She accepted my help. That fact landed inside me with a weight I could not shift. It settled into the place where certainty used to live. I offered another sip and another. After the fourth, "No, I will not count in numbers tonight, because nothing about this belongs to arithmetic." After a few careful tastes, she turned her head an inch away, enough to say enough without words. I pulled the cup back and set it down. The wind leaned into the eaves. The day thinned. Out at the tree line, a branch shook and then remembered to be still. I took the rag I had brought and dipped it, wrung it until it was only damp, and touched the unbroken fur near the wound. Her skin twitched, but she did not lift her head. I cleaned away the crust at the edges, talking nonsense the way you talk to a horse to keep it from stepping on you. "You are brave," I said. "You are too brave for this world." My breath fogged the air between us, and then disappeared, as if the night were drinking me in small sips as well. I pressed the rag lightly to the torn place, not to cleanse it, too cold for that, too clumsy a man for that, but to tell the flesh it had been seen by kinder eyes than the ones that tore it. A warmth came off her through the blanket and into my hands. It was not the rough heat of fever. It was the stubborn heat of life saying, "I am still here." She closed her eyes, and the line of her mouth softened. Something in my chest did the same. A memory rose, not asked for. My wife on a winter evening, her palm against my cheek, the two of us holding each other, as if the world beyond the door were made of wolves. I blinked hard and returned to the porch and the breath and the blood and the body that needed me now. Strange how grief and mercy look alike when they pass through your hands. I eased the blanket tighter around her, tucking the edge near her paws so the wind could not steal it. The rifle hung behind me inside the doorway, out of reach in a way that felt more honest than brave. I sat on the top step, not quite beside her and not quite away, and listened to our breathing find a rhythm that did not belong to either of us alone. A thought settled on me, both heavy and bright. She has chosen you, not because you are strong, not because you are wise, because you were the door that opened. I decided I would keep watch until her breathing evened out, until the shaking in her flanks gentled to something the night could carry. I told myself I would bring her another sip later, and that would be that. A small mercy, a closed circle, a story with the good sense to end where it ought to. I decided that this would be all it ever was. Night thickened until it felt like a weight on my shoulders. The snow came harder, not in showy flakes, but in tight windless sheets that sealed the world shut. The porch light threw a small circle that the dark kept trying to swallow. I had banked the stove, I had set the cup and the rag aside, I had told my body to sleep. It would not listen. I took a chair by the window where I could see the shape of her under the blanket, the rise and fall that anchored me to this hour. Every time her chest paused, I forgot how to breathe. Every time it moved again, I was grateful like a man who finds a well in the desert. The old clock on the shelf did what clocks do. It made a sound just steady enough to be cruel. I watched the snow fill the prints I had left on the steps. I watched the frost take the edges of the panes. She shifted once, so slightly I thought I had imagined it. A small sound slipped from her throat, not pain exactly, more like the voice of something too tired to argue with the night. I stood up and sat down again, both motions wrong. Sleep circled the house, sniffed the door, shook itself, and trotted away. I do not know how long I sat there with my hands on my knees like a boy waiting to be called to the headmaster. Time lost its clever tricks. The world shrank to a rectangle of glass and a dark shape breathing. I told myself this was simple. A wild thing had come here to finish, and I was the witness, nothing more. The thought did not hold. It kept sliding off the fact of her eyes in my memory, the way they had not looked past me, but into me, as if to plant something there that would sprout later, whether I liked it or not. Then the forest found its voice. It was not loud. It did not tear the sky. It rose from the tree line like smoke and curled over the roof. A long calling note, even and patient, stitched with a sorrow I felt along my ribs, the sort of sound that finds the animal in you and asks it to stand up. My jaw ached and I realized I was clenching my teeth. The hair along my arms prickled under my sleeves. The kettle on the stove sighed, though I had not set it to boil. I knew that sound. It was a wolf's voice, thrown far and shaped to carry farther. It was a name spoken across miles. She heard it. Before I could think, she gathered herself under the blanket like a river curling for one more push against a rock. Her paws pressed the boards. Her head rose and wavered, fell, rose again. The stutter of her breath sharpened. The second call came, lower and nearer, and the window between us and the trees became a drum. She planted her forepaws, the claws catching on the wood, and tried to lift her body. The blanket slid. Her flank opened along the wound, and she made a sound I will never forget, a bitten-off plea. And then she sagged and hit the boards hard enough that the door shuddered. I was up and out the door without remembering to cross the space between. The cold struck my face like a scolded hand. I knelt at her side, and the boards numbed my shins in a heartbeat. "Easy," I said, and I hated the word for being too small. "Easy now." She heaved once more, stubborn as a tide, and failed again. The blanket had twisted tight around her hind legs. I worked it free, my fingers stupid with cold and fear, and laid it back over her shoulders. She panted, eyes wet with the kind of pain that has nothing to do with teeth. The call came a third time, closer, and I felt it enter my chest and turn. She reached for the forest, and I suddenly understood. Her own were calling her. The realization was not a thought. It was a change in the room. It was a lantern being lit in a place I did not know was dark. I laid my palm gentle against her neck, the way you lay a hand on a fevered brow. Her skin flinched, her muscles quivered. Then the trembling settled into a steady shiver, as if the body had accepted the message and was deciding what to do with it. The fourth call was shorter, a question at the end of a long sentence. If I had not spent a lifetime in places where words are rare and necessity speaks first, I would tell you I imagined what it said. But I did not imagine. I heard waiting in it. I heard, "We are here." I heard, "Come if you can, and if you cannot, we will stand at the edge where the world meets the house of a man, and we will decide together what is left to do." I wanted to shout at the trees to be patient, as if patience were a thing I could distribute. I wanted to order the night to give her back what it had taken. Instead, I did the only thing that felt true. I spoke to her as if my voice could tie a rope between her and the line of shadow where her kin waited. "They know," I said. "They are near. Stay with me a little longer." The snow had begun to whisper against the porch boards. It made a soft sound like paper being folded. I could smell the iron of blood, the wool, the old wood of my house, the clean cold that comes when the temperature drops and even the air tightens its belt. She tried to rise once more and failed, not because she did not want to live, but because life is a stubborn business, and sometimes the body does not receive the memo. She laid her head down and closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in calculation, counting the distance with the map animals keep under their skin. I went back inside for the cup, warmed a little water, returned, and tipped it to her mouth. She took a few small sips and turned away, saving strength like a miser saves coins for a debt he cannot avoid. The calling stilled. The forest held its breath. Even the clock inside seemed to hesitate, as if time were waiting for permission. I sat with her while the dark deepened to the color of old bruises. I thought of all the times I had stood at the edge of that same forest with a gun and given myself permission to end things I did not understand. I felt the old shame crawl like a shadow across my shoulders and then lift because shame has no grip when a creature lays her life next to yours and asks nothing except that you not look away. Another long minute, no, not a minute, a measure without numbers, passed. The air changed. Somewhere in the trees a shape moved that I could not see, but could feel the way you feel a storm climb the back of your neck before it breaks. I understood then that waiting is its own kind of work, and we were doing it together, she and I, with every breath. I decided the pack would come. They would drag her back, and that would be the end of it. Around midnight, the world thinned until only the essentials remained: cold, breath, shadows. The snow had settled into a steady fall that made everything softer and sharper at the same time. I had moved the chair back to the window, the stove humming like an old animal in sleep, the cup within reach. The she-wolf lay where she had lain, tucked beneath the blanket, her flanks lifting and settling with the care of a carpenter placing a final board. The forest was a dark thought pressed against the house. Then the shadows separated themselves from the rest and learned to walk. At first I mistook the movement for the tricks winter plays when a man stares too long at one thing, but the shapes kept coming, fluid and certain, low to the ground, gliding over the snow without the clumsy struggle of men. They came in a line that was not a line, more like a thread pulled loose from the fabric of the tree line and drawn toward my porch. I did not breathe. My heart leapt so hard it seemed to strike the inside of my ribs with its knuckles, asking to be let out. I felt the old fear quicken in my legs, the desire to run, as foolish as running from the weather. The rifle was a long step behind me, an accident I did not try to correct. I stayed kneeling by the window, fingers braced on the sill, as if I were holding the house in place. They gathered there, not 3 feet beyond the top step, dark in the white wash of snow and lamplight, their coats rimmed with frost like garments edged in glass. Several, more than a pair, less than a horde, each with a posture that said both ease and readiness. I had seen wolves in every mood, but never in this one. They did not charge, they did not circle, they did not throw their voices at the sky to announce their claim. They sat, one by one, as if obeying a law older than the trees. They lowered their haunches and arranged themselves in a half-moon facing the porch. Silence rose between us, a tall, careful thing, not to be touched. Their breath showed like thin sailcloth in the lamplight and vanished. Eyes caught the glow and held it, not yellow, not red, but the color of deep wells. I could not count them without breaking something delicate, so I did not count. I let the fact of their number rest on my skin like the snow. Beside me, the she-wolf stirred. A thread of sound left her throat, so slight I felt it more than heard it. She lifted her head, pain stitched into the movement, and the blanket slid from one shoulder. Her ears pricked forward. The pack did not rise. They did not lean in. They held themselves the way good men hold their hats, in a house of grief. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, because staying behind glass felt like refusing a handshake. The cold bit into my lungs and sharpened my sight. The front rank of wolves did not startle. In the middle sat a large male, heavy chest, thick ruff, a scar like a pale thread across his muzzle. His eyes moved once across the boards, to the shape of the she-wolf, and then, God help me, to me. They were not looking at prey. They were looking at me as if I had been chosen as a keeper. I have known the weight of many kinds of attention, the way a crowd looks at a fool, the way a woman looks at a man she has forgiven, the way a doctor looks when he has only small words for a large truth. This was none of those. This was a measure being taken. This was a question that had only one honest answer. I felt the answer stand up inside me like a tired man asked for the last seat on a crowded bus. I did not speak. Words would have snapped the line that hummed between us. I set the cup on the step where they could see it, and moved slow, every muscle reporting its action to the rest. The she-wolf's eyes tracked the motion. The large male, call him the leader if names make you feel safer, lowered his head, not in submission, not in threat, but in acknowledgement, the way one keeper nods to another at a fence line shared by land neither owns. I went back inside for a second blanket, one that smelled faintly of cedar from a chest I open only on holidays. When I came out again, they had not shifted. The snow nested along their backs and along the rail. I draped the blanket over her shoulders, and one of the younger wolves, leaner and restless, leaned forward an inch and stopped at some boundary none of us could see, but all of us felt. The leader flicked an ear, and the youngster folded back into stillness, as if the command had been spoken in a language older than sound. The she-wolf pulled one paw beneath her, testing. Pain crossed her face like a shadow. Yes, but there was another thing there too, a taking of courage from the sight before her. A tremor ran the length of her body and then settled. I saw the old rhythm of the wild return to her breath, a thinner version than before, but true to its shape. The pack watched without impatience. I had the absurd sense that they were allowing me this small act, as if they had weighed my use against their need and found me fit for now. The night pressed close, listening. The stove ticked behind me. Somewhere a branch gave up its snow with a soft, muffled thump. I felt myself part of a circle I had not known existed until this hour, a rough and shining fellowship that did not require my understanding to be real. I thought of all the fences I had mended, all the traps I had once set, all the ways I had insisted on small borders to keep the big world out. And here was the big world, seated calm as elders in a meeting, and I was not outside it. I was inside, as sure as breath inside a chest. I do not know how long we sat like that, the humans and the wolves, and the house that had learned to hold both. Time softened its jaw and let go. Even my fear grew tired and lay down. I began to think, quietly, tentatively, that the worst had already happened, and the best was this: a night where no one asked more than presence from anyone else. The pack would keep their vigil. The she-wolf would gather what strength she could. I would keep the cold from her, and morning would put a gold edge on the trees and lead them away, each to their own work. I thought they would leave now, and everything would fall back into silence. The wolves did not leave. They settled deeper into their half-moon, a living shoreline holding back the dark. Their breath kept time with the fall of snow, and every now and then one ear would twitch, not toward me, but toward her. The leader stayed motionless, frost collecting along the ridge of his back like a line of old scars lit silver. I waited for some sign they might object to anything more than watching. None came. Their stillness felt less like threat now, and more like witness. Inside, the kettle had cooled to a sullen warmth. I set it back on the stove and fed the fire until the iron belly hissed and the lid rattled in small, impatient speech. I found a bundle of linen I had meant to give away and never did, cut it into strips with the kitchen shears, and rolled each piece as if careful hands could guarantee a careful outcome. I took down a small bottle of spirits from the top shelf, the one I saved for guests and ghosts. My fingers were too sure for a man untrained, the way hands remember what the mind refuses to name. Maybe it was all those dogs over the years, or the neighbor's boy when the axe slipped, or the old times with snares and blood that taught me where not to press, or maybe it was nothing but need, which is its own teacher. I brought the kettle, the rolls of cloth, the bottle, and set them on the step. The pack watched. The leader did not blink. The blanket had held some heat to her. When I touched her shoulder through the wool, warmth rose and met my palm with a quiet yes. I spoke too softly for anyone but her and the boards to hear. "All right," I said, "this will be ugly, and I am only a man, but I am the man you have." I lifted the blanket away from the wound. The night breathed in. The torn flesh was cleaner than before, thanks to the cold, but it was not the sort of thing a person should see and still believe in mercy. I took the rag, dipped it in hot water, squeezed until the steam rose, and was carried off in shreds, and began to bathe the edges. The moment the heat touched her skin, she tensed. Her eyes did not leave mine. A sound came from deep in her throat, small and tight as a thread drawn through canvas, and stopped there. She did not show teeth. She did not lift a paw. She stayed. I worked with the patience people credit to saints, and forget belongs also to those who have run out of other choices. Where the fur was matted, I loosened it with water and time. Where the blood had frozen into the shape of her pain, I warmed it back to something that could move away. The cold bit my fingers until they went from stiff to clumsy, and still I kept to it. The wolves outside shifted once, as if one long muscle ran through all their bodies and had chosen to stretch. I did not look up. When the worst of the crust was gone and the blood no longer welled at every touch, I uncorked the bottle and let that sharp, clean smell climb into the night. I poured as sparingly as I could, whispering the way you whisper to your own courage when it tries to hide. The liquid hit the wound, and she flinched so hard the blanket creaked. The sound that left her was almost nothing, and it pushed tears into my eyes because of how small it was. A creature with teeth like knives and a body built for winter had chosen to keep that sound small, for me. I understood. She had given me her life to hold. The sentence walked into me and sat down. It took up the space where fear had been. It did not warm me, it steadied me. I pressed the cloth along the edges, not to fix, only to tell the skin that help sometimes comes as fire and sometimes as hands that shake. Behind us, the window became a mirror for a moment as a gust laid its palm against the glass. The reflection held a row of eyes, slow blinking lanterns. They were not hungry eyes. They were not angry. They were measuring. I cannot tell you how I knew the difference, only that I did. I tied the first bandage, then a second, my knots clumsy but honest, and when I slid the blanket back into place, the she-wolf sighed. It was not relief. It was permission for her body to stop guarding the wound and rest a fraction. I stayed beside her a while, hand resting on the blanket where her heart worked. The beat was quick and thin but stubborn, the way the last note of a hymn hangs in the rafters after the congregation has filed out. I told her useless, necessary things, that dawn always comes, even to a house like mine, that no one deserves to be alone with this much hurt, that I would not run. Her ear twitched once toward my voice, then pointed back toward the trees where a life waited to see whether it still belonged to her. The leader stood then, not in alarm, not with the stiff-legged announcement of a challenge, but with the unhurried fullness of a decision. He took one step forward into the lamplight and stopped at the bottom of the steps. We were a breath apart. The heat from his body rose like a memory of summer. He lowered his head the barest fraction and held it there, an acknowledgement with teeth folded and power reined in. If approval has a shape, it is the absence of harm, where harm would be easy. "Thank you," I said before I knew I meant to, and the word went nowhere and everywhere at once. I cleaned the bowl, reset the kettle, rolled the extra cloth, and tucked the blanket more firmly around her. The wolves did not move back. They settled again, the half-moon holding. The house learned a new way to be still. I felt emptied in the best way, like a man who has finally put down a load he did not know he was carrying. I thought this was the limit, to help a wild thing and have that be the whole of it, and nothing more would come of the night. If your breath catches, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. We keep the true stories of the wild. By morning, the house had learned to breathe with her. The stove hummed low, the kettle kept its small, civil sigh, and the light that crawled in under the curtain was the weak yellow of a body after fever. The she-wolf had slept in fits, but the terrible edge had dulled. When I laid my palm on the blanket, I felt warmth that belonged to life, not fire. Her breathing was shallow but even, the kind of rhythm a child adopts after a long cry. I eased the door open and stepped onto the porch. Night had polished the world and set it back down, clean and brittle. Snow lay smooth over the yard, a new page, and my old footprints had been swallowed whole. The half-circle in the dark was gone, no eyes in the tree line, no silhouettes holding their patient line. The pack had melted into the forest, as if to prove they had always belonged to imagination. The silence that remained had a polite, final quality, like the hush in a chapel after the last hymn. I stood there with one hand on the rail and told myself the story I wanted to be true. It's over, I thought. She'll gather herself, make her slow way to the edge of the yard, and the woods will take her back. I will watch her vanish between the black trunks, and that will be the last of it. A miracle contained, a circle closed. A winter night filed away where I keep the few bright things that did not ask me to pay for them twice. I went inside and busied my hands with small work to keep my heart from pacing. I warmed water not too hot, tore fresh strips of linen, set bread on a plate and meat beside it, more for the saying than the eating. When I lifted the blanket, her eyes opened, clearer than the night before. She did not try to rise. She watched me with that deep attention that makes a man stand straighter than his bones prefer. I cleaned what could be cleaned, tightened what could be tightened, and kept my voice low and ordinary, because ordinary is the rope we throw across impossible rivers. "You did well," I said. "Rest. Rest a while." She exhaled through her nose, a small sound that felt like a nod. By noon, the sky had gone the color of unpolished pewter. The wind wandered the yard without a plan. Twice I stepped outside and scanned the edge of the woods, not because I expected to see them, but because not looking would have felt like a kind of lie. Nothing moved but snow. The quiet had weight to it. It pressed on the porch boards, on the stairs, on the soft place under my ribs where worry keeps its bed. I took a few sips of spirits to steady my hands and poured a little into a cup for the wound, the way my father taught me when he still believed the world could be set straight by effort. Late day slid its shoulder against the house. The yellow faded to the gray that means evening is setting its table. I told myself again, much too loudly inside, that this was how it ends. She lives. She leaves. The story keeps its good manners and bows out, while everyone still remembers to breathe. I stacked wood by the door. I fetched more water. I laid fresh ash in the stove for later. I rehearsed the shape of the empty porch in my mind until it felt almost kind. Then the forest found its seam and pulled. The first call came thinner than the ones in the night before. It slipped under the door and along the floorboards. It shook the glass in the window without rattling it. It reached the small muscle behind my heart and pressed. The second rose a breath later, closer and broader, as if the trees themselves had opened their mouths. I did not need to look to know the direction. The sound was a hand on a shoulder I had forgotten was mine to offer. She felt it like lightning feels the ground. Her head snapped up, eyes going bright and black all at once. She gathered herself and set her forepaws under her chest. I could see every stitch of pain as she lifted, the scars in her muscles catching and then letting go. She rose the width of a hand, no, the width of a breath, and the world teetered. The bandage drew tight. A dark bloom spread through the linen. She pushed again, a raw, stubborn motion, and her legs buckled. She slid from the blanket and fell against my boots, her shoulder striking the leather with a dull, tired thud. I dropped to my knees so fast the porch protested. "Easy," I said, my mouth reachless, my hands not knowing which part of her to ask permission from. She pressed her muzzle against my shin, not biting, not begging, just leaning into me with the soft weight of trust. Her breath came ragged and hot, and the steam of it climbed my trouser leg. Her eyes lifted to mine, and everything I thought I knew about wildness remembered how to kneel. She seemed to ask, "Stay a little longer." The words arrived whole, as if someone had placed them in my mouth before I was born, and only now let me speak them. Stay. Not until morning, not until help, not until sense returned. Stay as a verb that means I see you, and I will not step away. I slid one arm beneath her neck to lift her head off the cold boards and drew the blanket back around her shoulders with the other. She let her weight fall into the cradle I made and closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in the kind of rest you take when you've decided to trust the night with half your burden. The calls came again, a braid of voices from just inside the trees. They did not insist. They did not mourn. They held a place open. I answered without sound, the way a man answers a prayer he cannot say aloud. I stropped my courage on the fact of her weight against my bones. I stroked the fur between her ears, careful of the torn skin, and felt the tremor there soften by degrees you could only measure with a heart. The light went out of the sky as if someone had cupped a hand over a candle. Snow began in earnest, crisp and whispering. I brought the cup to her mouth, and she took a few sips and turned away, saving what little she had for what little more the world might demand. I tucked the blanket once, twice, and sat with my back against the post so she could lean as much or as little as she liked. Time changed its gait. Between one breath and the next, I realized I had lost my wish for a tidy ending and found something larger in its place, a willingness to walk beside whatever would not fit inside a story. I was sure she would not live to see the dawn. Dawn did not so much arrive as thin the dark to something you could breathe. The first light came like a promise no one had signed, pale and careful, turning the snow from iron to pearl. I had not slept. The she-wolf had dozed in scraps against my leg. waking to a call only she could hear, falling back when strength refused to follow. Her breath warmed the wool and my bones together, and I held still the way you hold still for a bird that has chosen your palm. Then the forest breathed out company. They appeared not as ghosts this time, but as a procession with purpose. One shape, then another, more than before, their bodies thick with winter, their steps sure. They came on cat-soft feet that wrote no sound, the snow barely complaining under their weight. They did not skirt the yard. They crossed it like a right they had been born with, and they came almost to the steps, so close I could see the frost clinging to the guard hairs along their shoulders and the soft damp where heat met cold at their noses. No one bared a tooth. No one claimed the morning with a howl. They held their silence like a bowl full to the rim. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, the old fear trying to remember its lines, but something older stood in its way and said, "Hush." The she-wolf stirred and lifted her head. The movement pulled out of her with string and pain and will. She blinked at the light, then at them, and I felt the whole yard lean closer, as if the house, the wolves, and the dawn had agreed to share a single breath. They parted, not far, just enough to clear a lane, and through that lane a giant came. He was not just large. He carried largeness the way a mountain carries winter, without apology. His ruff was thick as a quilt, his chest broad, his paws as wide as plates. A pale scar stitched one cheek, a line where life had argued with him and lost. He stepped until only the bottom stair separated us. Every hair on my arms lifted. The she-wolf watched him with the solemn attention you give to a name you have not dared to say aloud. He stopped. He did not bristle. He did not lower his hindquarters the way they had in the night. He stood with everything gathered inside him and looked at me, not around me, not past me, not through me, at me as if I were a door and he had come for the key. Behind him, the wolves held their line. Their eyes did not glitter with hunger. They were quiet and awake, a living counsel. I braced my hand on the post to keep from swaying. I do not know what he took the measure of in that moment. My empty hands, the blanket, the bandage I had made with clumsy care, the way the she-wolf leaned against my leg, but I know he measured it. She tried to rise. It was a terrible, beautiful thing. Her forepaws reached, scraped, found purchase. Her back legs quivered and almost failed, and she lifted anyway, bone by bone, breath by breath, courage by courage, until she stood, if standing can be a thing you do in pain. She swayed. I reached a hand without thinking, just a ghost of touch at her shoulder, and then pulled back because this choice was not mine. She set one paw forward, then another. The blanket slipped and pooled behind her. She crossed the small kingdom of the porch boards one step at a time, down the first stair and then the second, into the thin stripe of light that lay at the bottom like a river. The big male watched her come without moving. When she reached the strip of light, she stopped. The world held its breath with me. He took one breath, heavy as a bell, and then, as if obeying a law not written by men, he bowed. He folded those great legs and lowered his head all the way until his muzzle brushed the snow. It was not the crouch of a hunter or the coil of a spring. It was a deliberate, solemn inclination, a giving of height, a letting of power to the ground. I have seen animals make 1,000 shapes, rage, play, fear, hunger. I have seen a dog lie belly up, a horse bow its neck to a child's hand, a cow kneel into birthing. I have never seen this. I had seen animals bow, but to see them do it for a man, for me, never. The line moved through me like lightning without thunder. My eyes stung, my mouth filled with the taste of iron and winter and astonishment. My hand went to my chest because my chest had forgotten how to be a chest. He held the bow long enough for the truth to find me, then rose, slow as dawn, and touched her cheek with his nose, the gentlest press, a greeting, a counting, a confirmation that life still rang inside her. The others did not surge. They did not close. They kept their places with the patience of stone. One younger wolf, a yearling, by the length and lank, padded forward 2 steps, lifted his nose to the air near me, and stopped as if he had found a line and chosen not to cross it. His eyes, clear and wild, slid to the bandage, then to my hand, then back to the old one. I did not speak. Words would have broken something that needed quiet to finish forming. I stood with my palm open, not in offering and not in defense, just open, the way you open a window to let the warm and the cold decide for themselves which will stay. The she-wolf took another step, then a third, and each one seemed to sew a torn piece of the morning back together. The big male gave a small shake, snow leaping from his coat in a silver halo, and turned slightly, not away from me, but enough that I could see the space he held for her at his side. The pack shifted in the smallest ways, the way a choir breathes together before a note. What do you call a thing like that? Blessing feels like a church word, and yet the porch felt like a church. Witness feels too small, and yet witnessing was all I could do. I had been included, not as a mistake and not as a threat, but as a necessary piece of what the morning required. I thought they would go now, gone into the timber and out of my life, and that would be the end of it forever. I went back inside and cut bread into careful pieces, the way you do for a child after a long fever. I warmed a little meat on the edge of the stove, not sizzling, just taking the chill off, and wrapped both in a clean cloth. When I stepped out again, the morning had put a thin polish on the snow. The pack held their quiet crescent. The great male had moved half a pace to the side, leaving a small clear space in front of the steps, as if he had swept it with his tail for me. I knelt and set the bread down first. The she-wolf watched, ears tilted, eyes steady. Hunger moved through her like a distant storm. There, undeniable, but not the only weather. I tore a small piece, held it on my open palm, and waited. She leaned, sniffed, and took it with care that undid me. No snap, no clatter of teeth. Lips drawn back just enough to spare my skin. She chewed slowly, head low, as if remembering how to be alive required relearning all the ordinary verbs. I offered another piece, then a small bite of meat warm enough to carry a smell that made the air feel like a kitchen. She ate with the same restraint, pausing between mouthfuls as if checking a ledger only she could see. Behind her, the wolves did not crowd. They did not shift or huff or lay claim to what would have been theirs in any other world but this one. They watched me feed her as if their eyes were hands blessing the work, and they kept their distance like elders letting a ceremony proceed. I have shared food with dogs, with horses, with the small birds that come to a windowsill on a hard winter. I had never fed a wild wolf on my own steps, while her kin held the line just beyond the rail. The old part of me waited for the snap, the scramble, the surge. It never came. Permission sat in the yard like a third presence, me, the wolves, and that quiet, invisible right I had been given. She finished what I offered and turned her head away with a soft, satisfied breath, the kind that makes a man put down his knife and say, "That is enough for today." I wiped my hand on the cloth and tucked the blanket a little closer around her shoulders. The big male flicked his ear in that unhurried way of kings and looked once to the tree line. The message traveled through the crescent like wind through tall grass. Bodies rose. Snow slid from backs in gentle avalanches. No one looked at the scraps I had not fed. No one argued with the morning. They began to leave in twos and threes, not retreating so much as returning, each stepped thread sewing itself back into the big cloth of the forest. Paws pressed the snow into a pattern I could not read, and then lifted it off again, leaving the yard clean but not empty of what had passed. The great male paused last. He looked at the she-wolf, then at me, and then turned with a gravity that made the world feel older and kinder than it had any right to be. He vanished between the trunks with the others, and the silence that followed was not the same as the silence before, all except the young one. He, or she, I could not tell, only that the legs were long and the chest, still deciding what size it wished to be, hung back near the gate where the fence surrenders to the path. The youngster glanced once after the pack, once at the porch, then padded over to the opening in the fence and curled there, ribs against the lowest rail, muzzle on paws, eyes toward the trees. It was not the sprawl of sleep. It was the posture of a watchman. At first I mistook it for reluctance to leave, but the longer I stood with my hand on the post and the colder my knuckles grew, the clearer it became. The youngster was not stuck. The youngster was posted. A sentry set where yard and wild shake hands. The understanding landed with a thud I felt in my knees. They had left a guardian for her, for us. I went inside, brought out a shallow pan with fresh water, and set it by the step. The young wolf's eyes flicked to me and back to the trees, untroubled, already grown into the seriousness of the task. When the she-wolf lifted her head and took a drink, the youngster's ears twitched, not in warning, but in a small approval that I would have missed if the morning had been any louder. I sat on the top step with my back against the post, and the three of us, wounded queen, young guard, old fool, kept our shared quiet. A jay scolded from somewhere deep, realized the hour, and fell silent again. The stove inside ticked as it settled. The smell of meat still ghosted the porch, a thin, homely ribbon running through the wild. I found I could breathe without counting to keep myself from breaking. In that night I understood, animals know how to keep gratitude. The thought was not sentimental. It was a clean, hard truth, like ice that will hold your weight if you respect it. Gratitude, not as the cheap coin of tricks and treats, but as a law, the returning of watch for watch, life for life, presence for presence. The youngster's stillness said what no human could have explained without ruining it. We saw. We will stand. Dusk began to lay its blue hand over the yard. I fed the stove, set a plate for myself, and found I was not hungry, poured a little water into the cup and brought it out, adjusted the bandage that had crept, and smoothed the blanket once more. The she-wolf's breath had deepened by a shade. The young guard's eyes blinked slow, never closing long enough to lose the thread. I told myself, not for the first time, and not with any hope of being right, that this would fade with the light. Morning would come, the gate would be empty, the tracks filled, the porch a porch again. I thought that by noon I would start to doubt the sharp edges and soft centers of what I had seen. I thought that by nightfall I would have persuaded myself into calling it a dream with good manners. I thought by morning it would all be gone, and it would seem to me that it had been only a dream. Morning came honest and slow, the way true things do. The light crept along the floorboards and climbed the legs of the table and found the crack in the door I had left for luck. The house smelled of ash and wool and a thin ribbon of meat from the night before. I pushed the door open with my hip and stepped onto the porch. The young wolf at the gate lifted its head, blinked once, and did not move. The air was so clean it almost hurt. She was already awake. The she-wolf lay with her head up and her ears forward, as if listening to a far bell. The bandage had dried to a gentle brown that did not scare me. Her eyes were clear. She looked at me, and the look was not a question anymore. It was a sharing, the way two people standing under the same sky share the same weather, whether or not they speak. "Good morning," I said, and the words left visible in the cold, small and bright, then vanished. I knelt and set fresh water within reach. She leaned, drank without hurry, and then turned her face toward the trees. A line of prints stitched the edge of the yard where the pack had come and gone. The tree line stood patient, almost polite, as if it knew it had guests. She gathered herself the way night gathers before a storm, not with show, but with a calm that makes you find your feet. I slid one palm under the blanket to the warm rise of her shoulder and felt the small tremor there. Not fear, not weakness, only the body telling the truth about the work ahead. "You can," I said. I did not know who I was talking to. Her bones, the morning, God, all of them, I suppose. She stood, not in a rush, and not as if she had to prove anything to me or to the light. She set her forepaws, braced, and drew her weight up from the boards with a patience that had teeth. Her back legs followed, careful and slow. She wavered, steadied. The young guard by the gate did not move, but its ears tipped forward, and that small tilt felt like a hymn. She took one step, then another. The blanket slid and I let it go. The wind ran a hand across her coat and left nothing but the truth of her. When she reached the top stair, she stopped and looked at me. I kept my hands at my sides. I did not nod or speak. I let her see the whole of my face with nothing clever on it. A breath passed between us with the weight of an oath. She went down the steps and into the yard, each paw placing itself as if the snow beneath were glass. I followed with my eyes and with the part of me that had begun to learn to follow without asking where we were going. When she reached the gate, the young guard rose in a smooth line and fell into place a pace behind her. Together they crossed the yard that had been my world for so long and now felt like a small room off a larger house. At the edge of the trees the pack waited, not in a tangle, not with the nervous hunger of animals that think only of chance. They stood spread along the first shadows like a living threshold. The great male was there, the scar along his cheek, a pale thread in the morning. He did not come forward yet. He held the place where forest becomes field and let her do the work of reaching him. That mercy broke me more than any show of force ever could. She paused once halfway, swayed, took a breath that seemed to begin in me and end in her, and went on. The snow did not betray her. The earth under it remembered the weight of her and accepted it. When she came within a few strides of the line, the great male stepped out. He did not rush her. He did not sniff her like a stranger. He drew near with the solemn tenderness of someone meeting what was lost and is no longer lost. He touched his nose to her muzzle, then to the air above her wound, as if counting her breaths and finding them enough. The others held still. A warm cloud of breath rose from the line of their mouths and drifted up and away like prayer smoke. She stood under that regard, not proud, not shy. Whole, which is not the same as unhurt. She turned her head then, not to him, not to the path she would take, but back to me. The distance between us was not many steps, yet it felt like the length of an entire life. I had the foolish urge to wave, to make some sign a man makes when words are too clumsy for the moment they are meant to carry. I did not. I stood and let the moment be the size it needed to be. There was gratitude in her eyes that made me cry. It moved through me without asking permission and found every cracked place and filled it. It was not the soft gratitude of small favors, not the trained thanks of beasts who have learned our pockets. It was that bright, heavy kind that comes when life has leaned over the edge and been pulled back by hands that shake. It said, "I know what you did, and I will take it with me into whatever comes next." It said, "We met." It said, "Be well." Tears came and did not shame me. The wind caught the wet on my cheeks and stung me back into the truth of standing there. My knees wanted to go soft, and I did not let them. I swallowed against a throat that had decided to close. The young wolf by her shoulder flicked an ear, as if to agree that a man can cry and not be less for it. The great male turned then, blood and weight and winter and all the names men give him, and eased into the trees. She followed. The line breathed and broke and formed around them, not swallowing, not guarding, simply becoming a shape that fit the work ahead. For one more heartbeat, she kept me in her sight. Then branches accepted her, and she was gone. The young guard slipped after, last to go, then even that slim body was taken by the rhythm of trunks and light. I stood a long time after there was nothing left to look at. The gate seemed both small and holy. The porch, with its old boards and its older aches, had learned a new duty and done it well. I walked to the bottom step and put my hand on the rail where the great male had once stood and felt the ghost of his heat as if wood could remember. The yard was quiet, but the quiet had a hum in it, like a string still singing after the bough has lifted. A jay called twice and was answered. Far off, a branch cracked and then settled. My breath found the slow pace of a man who has carried something heavy a long way and put it down. I looked at the blank of snow where our prints had been, at the path where they still wrote their story between the drifts, and I did not try to fix any of it with sense. Sense is a smaller tool than a morning like that requires. I stood in the snow and could not believe this had happened to me. Not because I think myself unworthy, though I do, but because the world is not known for giving out this kind of mercy with names on it. Yet it had. It had chosen my poor porch and my shaking hands and my hard head. It had brought a wild life to my door and let me keep it breathing long enough to return to where it was meant to be. I could feel the shape of that truth under everything, big and quiet and final. Such a thing cannot be, but I saw it myself. If you have met a miracle in the wild, right, we are not alone in this world.